from the start is that I don't consider myself an expert in this area. It's just something where I've had quite a bit of experience and wanted to share really the journey that we've been on through the universities that I've worked at. So Huddersfield first of all, and now at the University of Stirling. And what we've looked at in terms of working with video content. When I joined Huddersfield University, I'll just do a quick introduction first of all. So that's what I look like on a good day. I am currently University of Stirling, having been at Huddersfield as assistive technologist for 2 years prior to that. So we've been looking at the law, and when I very first came into Huddersfield University, we were working primarily with the Equality Act, making us reasonable adjustments to make sure that students receive the same services as far as possible as students who are not disabled. And at that stage, we had introduced Panopto to do our lecture capture, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But obviously the second thing that we're now dealing with as well is the public sector bodies legislation, which is one of the reasons that we're here to discuss this. And that also has, I believe, some additional implications for video and what we're using and why it needs to be accessible. So when we introduced lecture capture at Huddersfield, we made more than 22,000 recordings in that first year. And you can see, looking at the graph here, that we had a real peak of viewings as the year went by, and you can spot the exam season there. So we immediately knew that it was something that was important. And from the very beginning, I was keen that all our students could access it in the same way. And one of the first things I did that somebody's already mentioned today is I actually got the data on which students we would particularly be catering for with hearing impairments. We had 7 students and I arranged to meet all of them and talk to them about what their particular needs were. So from the data that we've got, sorry, I'm jumping ahead here a bit. I'll try and stick to my slides. That would be a good idea. So lecture capture was an immediate hit, with one student actually saying lecture capture is the reason that I am passing this year. So looking at our disabled students, we had several things that were said by them. First of all, that it was helpful for memory problems, loss of concentration, hearing loss, and poor processing skills. Replaying at my own pace allows better note-taking, and you can look things up. Useful for reinforcement and confirmation. A good alternative to a dictaphone, and that was obviously used by a significant number of students. And it gives time to focus on the lecture itself. You're not busy taking notes in the lecture, so when you come back afterwards, you can look at it. There was a particular reduction in anxiety about missing something, and particularly useful as well for some students for a catch-up after a period of ill health. I remember myself from my own university days that if you were poorly, it was often difficult to catch up again afterwards. But there were still some things that we needed to work on, and that was particularly the better audio and video quality. And lapel microphones came up as a really big thing, because if we're going to work with the audio that staff are creating, we need good quality audio. And we found that many staff walked backwards and forwards away from the microphone, and we didn't always get that audio quality that we needed to do something further with it. And part of that was also a training issue for us. We also got a better awareness of students, of what the students were using, and how to access it and how they were using it. So that was all quite important for us to look at how we needed to work with the video to make it more accessible. So I turned my focus to students with a hearing impairment. And I suppose one of the first questions that came into my mind is, these students are already going to lectures. They're obviously getting what they need out of the lectures. How can we replicate that for the lecture capture? So I began by asking the students how they managed in the original lecture, and there were a variety of answers that came back. Some students could lip read if they were close enough to the lecturer. I remember one woman in particular, a mature student in her 50s, and she said that when she'd grown up deaf, her parents had made no concessions at all, and had taught her to lip read, and she'd always lip read. And she didn't actually feel that she needed much adjustment beyond that because she coped. But actually, is just coping enough? And I felt there was something that we could offer to her. Some students have a BSL interpreter actually in the lecture. So they have that part of the lecture, but can we offer that to them after the lecture as well? And some students were using hearing aids in the classroom and had a note taker as well. So what more did they need after the lecture? And these were the questions that we were working with when we began speaking to the students and looking at what we could offer. So the questions I came up with were, do our cameras capture the speaker well enough for someone to be able to lip read the speaker in playback? Can the BSL interpreter in class be seen well enough for the signing to be fully understood on a recording? And would captioning provide a viable alternative? So we began looking at all those options. The lip reading was very easy for us to look at. We looked at several videos and we realized actually lip reading wasn't a possibility with lecture capture. We could scarcely see the face in some videos. In some lecturers actually switched off the camera. I know some universities don't actually record the lecturer anyway. They just have the audio alongside the PowerPoint. So for Huddersfield, that was definitely not going to be a possibility for us. So we then began to look at the main room camera capturing the BSL interpreter, and you can see here that I set up a couple of dummy lectures. I'm actually the speaker in this one, and our BSL interpreter is sat to the left-hand side of the screen, which is where she would typically sit for a lecture. And we realized that the fine finger detail that a BSL interpreter uses can't really be captured. We needed that close-up, and we were thinking very much of what you see on the television, where you've got a full screen with the signer in the corner, and could we actually replicate that ourselves? And we went to great lengths trying to do this. We actually got, this is a music stand that you can see in the picture here that has an iPad on it. And we had to position this between the student and the BSL interpreter, but so that there was still a clear line of sight between the student and the BSL interpreter for the actual lecture. But we were trying to capture the lecture. And the answer was that we just couldn't do it. We tried it with an iPad that had a really good Panopto app on it, and it did allow us to synchronize it completely with the actual lecture, so that we could get the PowerPoint slides and the lecturer visible as well. But we found that the iPad was struggling to record the full hour and synchronize it and upload it, and it just kept failing on the upload side of it. We tried several times. We also found that there were difficulties in setting up for the lecture, because ideally you would have to provide somebody to set that tablet up. It's too much to expect the lecturer to do it when they're walking in and trying to set up their slides and get ready. You can't expect the student to do it, because that puts them in a position where if they were absent, their interpreter wouldn't be captured. So you're not providing an equal system. So ideally somebody would have had to go in and do it anyway. It just wasn't a viable solution for us at the time. And then we started speaking to the students a lot more. And the students were saying, well, actually, really what I'd prefer is to have captions. And one of the things that they were quite adamant about was that when they use their BSL interpreter, it's great because they can often have a slight conversation with them alongside the captions. But sometimes there's vocabulary and there's things that are used in a lecture that aren't quite captured by the BSL interpreter, but where they would really want to see those captions afterwards and be able to watch them back at their own place, with their own pace, with a full vocabulary set. So we began to look into the captionings that were available. Bear in mind we were actually doing all these things in parallel, so we were trying them. So the captions, I've just taken a screenshot from here, and you can see how the captions sit with the slide placed above it. So the captions are nice and clear on the page. And in fact, Panopto provides you with lots of options for the way that you see the captions. You can have it underneath or superimposed on the picture. You've got a choice of colors. You've got a choice of sizes. and it's switched on just using the CC underneath it. So this was the options that we came up with, was basically if the student is deaf or has a hearing impairment and has a BSL interpreter, we could try the capture, but it wasn't really working. So making captions available would. The student is deaf and sits near the front and lip reads, the captions were going to be a solution. And there was another group that came in at this point. So the student has another disability, which makes lectures difficult, or does not have English as their first language. And we discovered that there was a whole cohort of people who would actually benefit from those captions as well. So we're feeding into that group. Just like any adjustment that you make for disability, it has that ripple effect that can impact on other students as well. So we began to look at the solutions for captioning. Panopto is particularly good as a system in that it has a single-click captioning option. And you can see here I've got a list of lectures. The fact that we imported these captions with a single click, it tells you the service that we used. So we were using a 2-day turnaround at $2.75 a minute at that stage. But then you see the total tally of the prices for what we were paying for the captioning at the end. One thing that we discovered was that even if we put an edit on the front and end of the video, the captioning still included the whole video and the full cost for that. And that, I think anybody looking at those figures there, about $120, $130 for 48, 49-minute lecture, you appreciate that that isn't really sustainable. I don't know what sort of budgets your universities are working on, but that was going to be an issue to us. Having said that, Panopto does have other options, and their current 4-day turnaround is actually $1 a minute. So you're looking at closer to $60 for an hour-long lecture. So we began to look at this. Now this isn't going to show in this, but we'll circulate the slide deck afterwards. This was actually an interview that I did with a student. And one of the things that came through so strongly to me from this was a student who had been lip reading. Her hearing was actually deteriorating through the course at university. And she said to me afterwards she hadn't realized how much she was missing until she got the captions. And it was only when the captions were there that she suddenly, her course opened up. And she actually concluded her course with a 2-1. And she put a lot of that down to the captions that we were able to provide in that final year. So, I'm just going to run through a quick summary of where I got to at Huddersfield. The BSL capture would be useful for our students, but the students themselves were saying they actually preferred captions. Captioning can be very useful for a variety of students, but can we overcome these costs? And it's not cost effective to do universal captioning, which is what we really desire to do. There's also a delay between the event and the captioning, which is undesirable for the student. So we were still facing a lot of problems. One of the things that I did whilst at Huddersfield, just for my own curiosity, I wanted to know how these companies that offered commercial transcriptions were doing it. So I trained as a transcriber. It's actually bit piece work. You can sign up for it. Anybody in the world can sign up for it. And anybody in the world can do the tests to become a transcriber. I had to transcribe 2 or 3 pieces of work which were reviewed. And then suddenly I got this screen that said, start your transcribing work. So I clicked onto a link and the screen that looks like the one below comes up. And you have a video and you have somebody speaking in that video. And you can decide whether or not to accept that video. As you can see, there's a total reward for this video clip here of $10. And that will be about a 20-second video clip. And you write it in the bottom left-hand corner. You can replay it at varying speeds. But you also, you get a style guide, which is really important. You need to know that style guide absolutely inside out, because it tells you things like if you get the number 1 to 10, you must write it in full words. If it goes above 10, you need to write the number. It tells you whether you put commas in thousands or full stops or just write the word thousand. So it's not $10, it's 10 cents for this. Now, interestingly, just because I wanted to get a feel for it, I did an evening of transcribing work. In the whole evening, I earned $8, and then there was a currency fee on top of that. I think I actually got about £5.50 into my bank account that I should then theoretically have paid tax on. So I realised that it wasn't going to be a career change moment for me, but it fascinated me that the way that they were doing this was breaking it into these tiny chunks. So all around the world, there are people doing these tiny chunks. It's rare that you get more than 2 or 3 from the same video. And that's how they're doing their turnaround in order to get it back to you when you send off for this transcribing work. So I came back to university, and by this time I was at Stirling, and we are also using Panopto, which I think is a great system. It's really, really fascinating in lots of ways and offers a lot of facilities. But when we look at the captioning, when a video is imported into Panopto, it completely encodes the video. It encodes the speech for the speaker. So it is doing that speech-to-text transcription in the background. It also looks at every single slide, and it takes any text that it recognizes from a slide and encodes that as well. This makes all videos on Panopto fully searchable for the students. So if a student remembers a certain word in a video and they want to jump to that point, they can. But because it has made this transcript in the background, it does mean that it is also able to import captions. So it's very simple. I go into edit mode of a video, I click on import captions, and within about 2 hours of the video, it can import those captions for me. But if we have a look down here, you'll see that the captions that it imports are not what we would call human level compliant. That is what we're legally really obliged to provide for the students. And so what we decided to do recently at Stirling was actually to train some staff, and these tend to be our hourly paid note takers or people who are working on proofreading and things like that, to see how they would get on with doing some transcription work for us. So I taught them how to do this transcription. I can click into any of these blocks and you can see the time signature next to it, and they can improve on it. But we have run into a problem, and that is that for every minute of captioning, it takes 5 to 8 minutes in order to produce a transcript, to produce the captioning. This very much echoes some work done over the summer by Edinburgh University, and their work, they looked at the quality of the speaker, and they were actually getting students to do their captions for them. And you can see here that they've categorized their speakers into 3 different groups: no issues, a few issues, and a lot of issues. And a lot of this comes down to the accent, the dialect, the way the person speaks, the quality of the audio, are they near the microphone or not. And so it's really interesting looking at this. And you can see that it's between 5 minutes and 35 minutes just to transcribe a minute, with an average of 12 minutes. So 12 minutes, 18 minutes, or 24 minutes per minute of transcription work. That makes it very difficult to do as an in-house solution. So the other thing that we're looking at doing is transcripts. This is a text version of the video, and we use this when we don't have ownership of the video content. So our lecturers often use content that's on YouTube or Vimeo or other sources. And this can be generated in several ways. Sorry, I'm just going to have a quick cough. I can see people typing as well. So you can listen, pause and type, which is what a lot of people do with transcriptions for academic purposes. You can create an auto-transcript. So I've actually been using the dictate function in Office 365. That also exists in Google Docs, which I think it calls it type as you speak or something like that. It's in the tools section, and then tidying it up. You can use software such as Really Transcribe, which I've always found to be very good, but that again is built on the Google. Somebody's just taken the Google function for doing that and built it into a nice interface where you can have your audio and video. They have recently added on an auto transcribe function as well. And you can also do it using Dragon Naturally Speaking, which is where you listen to the video and you speak it back yourself, but you can train your Dragon. I always love that expression. You can train your Dragon to actually speak, to understand your accent, so you can re-speak the content and create a document in that way. So we are also looking at the transcripts, and the people that we're using here are reporting that making a transcript is faster than doing closed captions. But it's not as useful for the students because they don't know where in the video those words are actually spoken. They kind of have to watch the video and work out where it might be, although you can put in time markers to help them to see where it is in the video. So at the moment where we're at here is we're very much piloting our staff doing these captions and transcripts. We have spoken to Panopto, and I'm actually going to be at their conference in November where we're having an accessibility panel, and we're going to be talking about it. They are looking at improving the machine behind their auto transcriptions to see if they can get a better quality transcription coming out. But one thing we're interested in looking at longer term as well is something called Microsoft Translator. This started with Microsoft as a garage project, which was where they gave staff a day a week to work on something interesting. And it's now something that is available. You can download it, and I have actually used it myself at conferences. So where you speak, your words appear on the PowerPoint behind you. You can upload your PowerPoint in advance, and it will learn some of your vocabulary, so it knows what words might be coming up. But the other thing is that you can give a QR code at the beginning of your lecture and put that on the screen. Students can scan that, and then they can choose the language that they want as well. So they can actually have it appearing on their mobile phone. So if you have an audience that has mixed native languages, you can caption it on the screen into English. You say, I'm speaking English and I want it captioned in English. But people in your audience can actually have their own language coming up on their mobile phones as you're speaking. So that could be a really interesting approach longer term. And I'm looking for some really brave academic staff here now who might be prepared to have that in their lectures, given that it may actually be something that could be distracting. And that's what we want to know. Is it an advantage, or is it actually something that is going to be distracting? So I'm sorry that I've talked at length, but I hope that's given you some useful insight on what we've been doing. And as I say, I'm not putting myself up as an expert in any way on this, but it's certainly been an experience and a journey. And I'd be really, really interested to know what's going on at other universities and what sort of things you're trying. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ros. That's fascinating.